Make sure you check out our online store where we work with our graphic designer to create stunning garment and product designs that feature a wide variety of aircraft types such as British fighters, World War II aircraft, American bombers, Russian fighters and much more. You can pick your favourite designs and personalise any items within our Redbubble store that range from clothing right the way through to stationery. All of our designs feature our logo so you can show your support for the channel while getting a quality product. You can head to our website aircrewinterview.tv and click store, or go to redbubble.com/people/AC interview. Thank you and enjoy. Well, John, when did you first become interested in aviation?
I was never really all that interested in aviation, is the bottom line. I was at school in Newcastle in the 1970s. I was lucky enough to go to a grammar school. I wanted to leave school. Everybody expected I would do A-levels and a degree. I didn't want to do it. I wanted to leave school and get a job. And I loved electronics. When I say electronics, I'm talking about valves and batteries back then in the 1970s.
Yeah.
I was really interested in that. I was applying for jobs as an apprentice in different industries, the Central Electricity Generating Board, which is now, I don't know, the Electricity Board or something, the Post Office, as it was then, which clearly is now BT. Mm-hmm. And I was in Newcastle waiting for a bus home after an interview, and the bus stop was outside the RAF Careers office. And I went into the RAF Careers office to get, because they had all those glossy brochures then. There was no computers, you didn't do it online. And I picked a glossy brochure up. Now, my brother was already in the Air Force. He was a technician in the Air Force himself. And he'd said, if you're interested in that RAF's a great career. And so I picked a brochure up and I kind of signed on the dotted line straight away. Wow. And I joined as an electronics technician. I did 5 years as a technician. And after 5 years, then I saw that if you wanted to really move on in the Air Force, clearly you had to be an officer. Mm-hmm. And I'd got to the dizzy heights of corporal by then. You had to be an officer. And you had to fly. There's no doubt about that. The senior echelons of the Royal Air Force were all aviators. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I decided. I said, I'm going to try that. I applied to be a pilot, went for all of the tests and didn't get through all of the tests. And they said, you'd be better, just starting now, if you want to do it, training as a fast jet navigator. So after my officer training at Cranwell, I started on the Tornado. So I was never one of those people that loved aviation. I've got friends who built their own little aircraft out of balsa wood in their garage, and they go fly the damn thing at the weekend. So, John, come and fly the balsa wood something or other. No chance. I'm not getting in that damn thing with you. So I love the life of the Air Force. I love the flying, but I was never somebody who said I've got to be. I never had this dream from a kid of flying. No, which is a bit boring, really, as I joined the Air Force.
No, it's a great story. So we're here to talk about the Tornado. So tell me your first thoughts on the jet, because she's a beauty, isn't she?
I loved being on the Tornado. Again, I think that when I went through training, so officer training in 86 and start my navigator training 87 at RAF Finningley in Doncaster. You were after, I can't remember the exact time scale, but kind of halfway through what I think was something like an 18-month course, you were streamed about whether you were going to go multi-engined aircraft or fast jets. And I was lucky enough to go what was then called Group 1 fast jets. And then towards the end, you had to decide what aircraft you wanted to fly. And of course, there was a load of aircraft then for navs. Yeah. So, the very best guys wanted to do the Buccaneer, then the Phantom. And the Tornado was a bit further back because it was regarded as much easier crew aircraft. Because it was, by 1980s technology, it was high tech. By today's technology, a bit of old bloody Microsoft One or something like that. And I remember, they say, what's your preference for postings? And I said, Phantom, Buccaneer, Tornado. And most of us went on the Tornado, in actual fact. But I loved it. I loved flying it. I loved being part of the crew. I loved being part of a squadron. And as an aircraft, it's an amazing aircraft to be a nav on, because it's by the standard. It was so up to date, so technological. It's not by today. So then there was no what we would call GPS, global positioning, what most people understand as a sat nav. The sat nav in their car with a digital map that says you're here. None of that existed. So the Tornado had inertial navigation, which meant that you would program in your starting point and allow the inertial navigation to set itself up. That could take 15 minutes on the ground. Nothing was done fast. You're 15 minutes waiting for the IN's not sorted. No, wait. So if there's a massive scramble, you're still waiting for this damn bit of kit to sort itself out. And then the inertial navigation, because of the cogs and the whistles and everything else, would know how fast you are going, what attitude you are at, where you are, and it would basically say, right, I know that you started there, you've been flying at 500 miles an hour for 20 minutes, heading this, so you must now be here.
Yeah.
And it kind of worked, but it just, sometimes it would wander off, and it could be half a mile out, it could be 2 miles out, and so you had to keep the kit updated. That was the nav's role. There was no digital map. You had what was called a moving map, and it was I think it was 35mm film or something like that.
Wow.
And it rolled through, and it then was projected onto a screen, and so it was quite old-fashioned by today's standards. And of course, the terrain-following radar was an astonishing bit of kit. I mean, astonishing for the time.
Mm-hmm.
So the terrain-following radar, again, when you talk about the first Gulf War and what everybody was doing, I was tweeting about this earlier in the year, and I had serving RAF officers, 2 stars, who I've known for many years, because I'd said, they were hurtling across the desert at 200 feet and they would say, yeah, but you had night vision goggles, John. No, we didn't. Night vision goggles, there was some kicking around, but they were not compatible with a Tornado. And you were not flying into combat wearing night vision goggles. Absolutely not. So the terrain following radar is basically, in the first nights of the Gulf War, is basically looking ahead, looking at the way the sand dunes undulated, the way power lines crossed, the way a radio mast might be there. And the terrain following radar was simply flying the jet with a pilot sitting with his hands on his lap, monitoring the systems. Mm-hmm. Total darkness. You can't see the nose of the aircraft. You can't see the wings. And so it was an incredible bit of kit. And the first time you flew terrain following radar, it took quite a bit of training. We went to Goose Bay in Canada, and you'd be flying an 8-ship, so 8 Tornadoes, parallel track. So you'd have 2 up front, a couple of miles behind, two right the way down, all 8 jets. And we would fly this in cloud, in the valleys and the mountains of Canada to test the system, all 8 jets flying in parallel. And the whole of the attack would be flown in completely automated, using autopilot and terrain following radar. And it was astonishing. And you trusted it. You trusted it implicitly. But it required the kit to be updated. So if you thought you were here, and in actual fact you were here, and some people came really close together. There's a couple of occasions in the Gulf where people have gone into a target at kind of 200 feet in the darkness, and when they reform on the other side, they've crossed over in the dark at the same height at 200 feet, and they haven't realised that they've crossed over. And that happened on a number of occasions for real and in training. Anyway, I'm banging on a bit too much.
Yeah, just because I want to know it just from your new book, one of the blurbs on the back, it gets you straight away, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We were doing about 620 miles per hour, 200 feet above the desert in total darkness. I mean, crazy.
And it was, we designed this cover. And if you look at that, so you've got the Tornado coming down the runway with it under fire and the JP-233. And the whole point about it, Mike, was nobody had ever seen anything like this before. We had trained Cold War tactics that, we're talking about the 80s. So we were prepared for a Cold War turning hot, the Soviet Union invading what was then West Germany, so East and West Germany, the Iron Curtain.
Yeah.
And that's what we trained for. So we were really experienced in ultra low flying during the day. We practiced regularly in the couple of areas in the north that were allowed, and in Goose Bay or in Las Vegas on exercise Red Flag, flying down to 100 feet and maybe 540 knots. What's that? 620 mile an hour, something like that. and on terrain following radar at night 200 feet. And we trained for all of that. And we trained against the Soviet missile systems. We trained in Red Flag. We trained in the Otterburn Ranges. We trained in tactics against fighters. So we have either our fighters coming and attacking us as we're going in, or American fighters or French fighters, Canadian. We trained, but nobody had ever done it for real. Not one single second of combat had been flown until that first night, when people did that for real. And I remember Nigel Risdale, who led who led the very first sortie. Yeah. So we had 3 major Tornado bases in the Gulf. Each Tornado base sent up 8 jets. So 24 Tornadoes are heading across the Saudi-Iraq border in total darkness, like a black cloak over the cockpit. Nobody can see anything other than the glow of the instruments. And they're all 200 feet, 540 knots, heading in towards the target. And Rizza said to me, he said, and we are, because the pilots are clearly monitoring the systems, and the navs are making sure that the systems are updated and keep checking everything else. And Rizza said, so I looked out in my left 10 o'clock, and out of the darkness, a little pinprick of light appeared. And he said, as we flew closer out in the left, he said the pinprick of light started to evolve. And what I could then see was that it was an exploding mesh of AAA fire, interlocking, interweaving, spiraling, AAA anti-aircraft artillery, flak, people would know from the Second World War. Mm-hmm. And he said it's just rising from the ground, and it's forming a dome in an airfield in the distance that is just a wall of exploding cannon fire. And it's just sparkling, like a sparkling Christmas tree light. But they're not lights, they're tubes of molten explosive metal. And he said to John Broadbent, our squadron boss in the back, he said, bloody hell, somebody's been hit over there. And JB said, yes, mate, that's our target. And as he said that, all the jets, because they're all on autopilot, all turned left and all pointed at this dome, this wall of lead. And he said you couldn't do anything about it because it was the first night. He said there wasn't really any time for fear because you couldn't really understand. But he said you got in the middle and you were probably only in it for 10 seconds, 15 seconds as you went in and out, dropping the JP233s on the airfield. He said, but it was like trying to run through a shower without getting wet. And JB, John Broadbent in the back seat, described it for me the best. He said, you know, when you're driving through a really heavy snowstorm and all you can see is the flicker of the snow in your headlights. And then suddenly, the snow starts to whisk past your car window as you go through it. And he said, that's what it was like. And he said, you don't know how you're not hitting a flake of snow, which is an exploding bullet. Some people came back with holes in. And obviously, as time went on, we started to lose people as well. But the point, and I kind of wandered off a bit. Nobody had ever seen anything like this. We trained, we prepared, but nobody knew what it was going to be like for real. And it was a shocker on the first night, and it got worse.
So how did yourself and the crews feel going in? Did you feel confident, or was the nerves there, or would you not show that?
I think a bit of everything. I think on the first night, there were nerves, there's no doubt. But I certainly remember a sense. I went on the first morning during the daylight. I certainly remember feeling a sense of, I'm going to say fear, but it was, you just couldn't do anything about it. It's like being a firefighter or a paramedic. You know, nobody had ever done it before. So it's like being a paramedic that's never attended a massive crash on the motorway. And suddenly the blue lights are going and you're hurtling down and you're faced with a pileup of 5 cars, 15 people injured, and you can't say, oh, well, I'm not doing that. That looks a bit difficult.
I'm off home.
You just have to run into the middle of it, and you're trained. And so there was a sense of fear, there was a sense of trepidation. But I guess what everybody says in the book is the overriding sense was, I'm with my mates. I've got my mate over here, my mate over there. I can't let them down. But, and we might talk about it a little bit later, depending on time, some people after 2-3 days of doing the same thing and increasing losses, knowing that if this went on, it could be you might not last long. There were a couple of people who had quite severe mental breakdowns. In actual fact.
Wow, it's unfortunate. But what, in your opinion, and maybe the other crews, was the? I mean, we didn't really have a choice, but was a Tornado the right aircraft for that environment?
It was exactly the right aircraft. Indeed, there's a huge misnomer, Mike, about the Tornado and the first Gulf War and low-level flying. So first of all, on the first couple of nights, everybody, not almost everybody, was flying low-level. So on the first 2 nights, the Americans lost 2 Strike Eagles at low level. And people don't know that. They are 2 of the most, by what were then the most modern, highly defended, high-tech aircraft. They lost 2 flying low level. They lost a number of A6s. Obviously, the Tornado lost a number of aircraft, but everybody was flying at low level on the first few nights. The B-52s, there's a little bit from one of the B-52 guys, because I'm trying to explain that. People say, oh, the Tornado was doing these missions that were wrong. No, they're dangerous. That's what we trained to do. The B-52s were flying at 50 feet over the desert.
Christ.
On the first night, and they're doing it on basically on radalt, so they've got no kit that's meant to be doing that. The B-52's wingspan is it 185 feet? I think something like that.
It's big,
and they're flying at 50 feet. And the guy who's describing it saying there's a guy in the back saying just be bloody careful. But they were flying because everybody was terrified of the Iraqi Air Force, the Iraqi air-to-air missiles. That's what our big fear was, and the Iraqi surface-to-air missiles, the SAM-3s, the SAM-6s, the SAM-8s, they're radar-guided missiles. That's what our big threat was. We didn't know what flak was. We didn't know what AAA was. Mm-hmm. So the Tornado was designed to fly at ultra-low level into the heart of an airfield and drop JP-233. And that's what it was doing. And it did it really well. And people said, oh, well, it didn't work. But there's no real evidence. That what we do know is that the Iraqi Air Force stopped flying in any real numbers very quickly. And that's because the Tornado force, which was, in American terms, a small part of the force. I think, what did we have in the end? 60 Tornadoes out there or something? I think it was about that towards the end. The Allies were putting up between 2,000 and 3,000 sorties a day. A day. 2,000 and 3,000. And so sending 6 Tornadoes to one airfield and 6 Tornadoes to another airfield, but it was part of an overall campaign. The campaign was to ground the Iraqi Air Force so that the troops on the ground were not threatened when they put their boots on the desert and crossed the border. And everybody has forgotten about this in their hindsight expertise. They just don't understand. The Tornado was the right aircraft and it did the right job. And once that job was seen to have been done, because the Iraqi Air Force stopped flying, there was no intelligence to suggest there was any particular reason, but they stopped flying. Mm-hmm. Then it went on to do other things. Now, medium-level bombing in a Tornado was not what it was designed to do, but it did it. And then, of course, very quickly, Buccaneers were rushed into the region to provide laser targeting. And I talk about that and the reasons why it happened. And more importantly, the reasons why it didn't happen in the first place. Because people, again, don't understand it, but they're there. And then, of course, TIALD, the Tornado laser designation system, infrared, came in as well. So everything was being rushed into service. So the Tornado developed in what would normally have taken, 5 years. It developed in 5 days, 10 days in the course of war, of what it was doing. And so it did its job. And the guys who did it amazingly well. I didn't. I was sitting on my fat backside in Baghdad by then.
Yeah, we'll get onto that maybe in a bit there, John. But was there much camaraderie between like all the crews when you were at base, or was there still like that kind of banter there, or was it all focusing on the job?
Bit of both, depending on where you were. At Bahrain, we had quite a mixed squadron from different bases, and that was quite difficult because the Tornado force was massive. And again, people have forgotten this. Go back to 1990, the RAF had 430 Tornadoes, 430. So I think it was 11 squadrons of GR1s and 5 or 6 squadrons of F3, something like that. I can't remember, but it was 430 Tornadoes. And so you didn't really know. So at my base was RAF Larbrook. We had 4 squadrons of Tornadoes. And I knew my mates on the squadron. I knew a few people from the other 3 squadrons who were my era, who had been with training with or something like that. But you didn't know.
Yeah.
So you had other people from different squadrons, and then you had other people from different bases. And so some of the guys from RAF Marham, 27 Squadron and 617 Squadron, came out to our base in Bahrain, and I didn't know any of them at all. And there wasn't much mixing. You wouldn't do it that way now, but it was just the way that it was formed. But the camaraderie was absolutely there, and the banter was absolutely there. And the base, for instance, the base at Tabuk was much more austere than ours. There were very austere conditions, and everybody was living really closely together, and that camaraderie was really important. So it depended on where you were, really.
Absolutely. But before we get on to chat about the new book, let's talk about your famous incident. Has it followed you around all your life? Do you ever get questions or not get questions about it?
It does. I mean, it's one of those things that obviously you'll have the picture somewhere. Myself and John Peter shot down, captured, tortured, paraded on TV. So in one way, it was the worst moment of my life, because it just signaled everything had gone wrong. So the attack had gone wrong. I'd made a mistake on the attack run, and the bombs hadn't come off the aircraft. So that had gone wrong. Then 3 minutes later, in an not connected incident, but 3 minutes later, heading out of the theatre, we were hit by a heat-seeking surface-to-air missile. So we were shot down. JP luckily managed to save both of my pilot, saved both of our lives, because we nearly hit the ground. We were captured, we were interrogated, we gave in to the interrogation, and then paraded on TV. So first of all, when it happened, I had no idea what it meant. I knew that there was a gun against my head and I'd been threatened with execution if I didn't do it, but I had no concept that it would become one of the, you can probably call it one of the most, one of the most famous images of conflict. And so it was the worst time of my life, because for me, it signaled failure, from the failure of the attack right through to the failure of not resisting interrogation. Mm-hmm. But there is no doubt about it that I would not be talking to you about book number 17.
Yeah, I know, 17. Yes, 17.
I know, I've got an English O-level from 1979. That's the limit of my writing skills, my English O-level. And 30 years on, I'm still writing about completely different experiences. So it's kind of life sliding doors. I don't know what I would have been doing if I hadn't been shot down, but I wouldn't be talking to you about book number 17. So it has followed me about a bit. And in some ways, and it's one of the reasons I wrote the book, it detracts from everybody else who did a brilliant job flying the Tornado. JP and I, not so much after one, half a mission. But all the other guys did an amazing job. So it's important to remember their contribution, really.
Absolutely. And obviously, it changed your life professionally in terms of writing and stuff, but did it change your outlook on everything else?
A little bit. So I don't want to sound too kind of grand, but when you have faced death, and when you have thought, I am now going to die, and that happened to me probably 2 or 3 times during captivity or capture and captivity, where I thought, okay, my life's over. I am now going to die. That does give you a kind of a curious perspective on what is and isn't important. But it hasn't really changed anything kind of grand, for want of a better... You
don't go outside and like, oh, that's a tree. You don't do anything like that.
I do remember, and everybody said this, kind of in the darkest days of captivity. I mean, in the really, really bad times. Kind of pray. I was brought up in a religious household, Catholic, and I went to a Catholic school. But I was lapsed. I didn't do any. I had no interest in religion. Yeah. But everybody said this. Everybody said that they prayed, and they promised to, in the darkest days, in the most terrifying moments, they prayed to whatever God they had been previously taught about. And they said, everybody said the same thing. If you get me through this, I'll be a better person. And it kind of lasted for about 10 minutes after we were released, to be perfectly honest.
Absolutely. But all stories are going to be in the book. But before we get onto the book, John, I want to talk about your time on the F3 because that doesn't get enough love. What did you feel about
not
going
love?
From...
Not enough love.
No.
I loved the F3. But air defence was kind of a very new thing to me. Ground attack, navigation, maps, fixes, updating the kit on the Tornado was on the GR1 was a relatively straightforward. Air defence, bit more kind of three-dimensional chess in your head. The Tornado system was great. The Tornado F3 was not a fighter. It was never going to win in a one-on-one knives in a bloody postbox fight with an F-16 or an F-15C. It was never going to win. But what it was, first of all, with Crew 2, you had massive situational awareness, and it was very, very good at coordinated attacks. And so when we took it on, I think it must have been Green Flag, I think, something like up to Canada, we gave a really good account of ourselves. If you got into a mix-up with 8 F-15s, you weren't going anywhere. But if you could stand off and be sneaky and use its incredible low-level capability, its fantastic by then radar capability, and on a number of occasions, we managed to take down. We were tasked with attacking the HVAA, the high-value air asset. So either something like the AWACS. So the Americans were meant to be protecting the AWACS, and we would be tasked as the enemy to go and get it. And we got through on most occasions by sneakiness, by doing what we did best, and so it gave a good account of itself. And it was designed to stop 40 Soviet blackjacks or bears coming across from the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap and launching either their cruise missiles or dropping bombs. It was meant to stand off and with its 4 Skyflash and 4 Sidewinder missiles, it was meant to be kind of targeting from afar, and it was really good at that. It was really good at it. Listen, it wasn't as good as a Strike Eagle. No, nobody's going to say it was, but it was good, and it was a great aircraft to fly because it was still a fantastic aircraft to fly at low level, a brilliant aircraft to fly at low level.
So yeah, there you go, folks. A bit of love for my beloved F3 from John Nichol there. So I appreciate that. But yeah, John, let's get onto the book. It's just come out recently. It's Tornado in the Eye of the Storm. Tell us what the book is about for our viewers who may have not picked it up yet.
It is the story. Well, as you've said already, Mike, I told my story in Tornado Down 30 years ago about what I did. So this is the story of everybody else. I am a passing character in the book, but what I've done is I've gone back and interviewed all of my friends and colleagues who flew the first operations, interviewed the other prisoners of war who were shot down and ended up in captivity, and most importantly for me, interviewed the families, the loved ones who waited at home. So the wives, some of whom lost their husbands, the daughters, some of whom were woken up in the middle of the night to say your dad's missing in action, some of whom were woken up at night to say your dad's missing and he's not coming home. And so it's the interwoven story of the Tornado at war in 1991 and the families who fought their own war back home.
Yeah, I think that's very important to recognise the families because they don't get enough love and support sometimes from the public.
I think we forget about it, and sometimes I think the people at the front line forget about it as well, because they are fighting a real battle. There's a couple of instances in the book where in the military we call it the knock at the door. Middle of the night, somebody's coming to your door, and it's bad news.
Yeah.
There's one, and it was in training before the war started, and it was OC 27 Squadron, Bill Green. He set out on a nighttime training mission because he was deploying to the Gulf in a few days. And I spoke to his wife, Jenny. In fact, I've just got an email from her because she's just read the book. I spoke to his wife, Jenny, and she's in bed, 1 o'clock in the morning. And she woke up and thought, what the heck is that? Puts her dressing gown on, walks downstairs, and this is RF, they're at RF Marmy's OC 27 Squadron. She says she opens the spy hole, looks out, and the RAF Marham station commander, Jock Stirrup, who went on to be the chief of the defence staff, actually, Jock Stirrup is outside in his full dress uniform with his hat on, and there's a padre with him.
Mm.
And Jenny said, if you are an aircrew wife, you know what that means. If the black car pulls up to your house, you know what that means. And she said she wouldn't let him in. And it's tragic and sad and emotional, but she, in the one way, it's just the emotion of it is surreal. And she said she wouldn't let him in. She sat back down on the step, and she said poor old Jock had to stand outside because if I didn't open the door, the news couldn't come into my house.
Yeah.
And she said eventually, clearly, she had to open the door. And he said, Bill's missing, mission over the North Sea. There's no hope whatsoever. And that's all they knew. They recovered little bits of the wreckage. There's some footage of them picking out, I think, a bit of the fin or something in 1990. But his body was never recovered. He'd gone. That was it. Gone. And that so she said goodbye to him as he went to work. They had plans because he was deploying in, I think, 3 or 4 days. They were going off to see his parents in Northumberland, actually, do a little bit of walking on the beach, and then he was going off to war. And he went off to work, and that was it. No goodbyes other than, I'll see you later, love. Nothing. And I interviewed Jenny at length about her experience. And Bill's son, Jeremy, who was a 17-year-old teenager then. And that was really emotional, talking to Jeremy about his father's death and how it still affects them 30 years on.
Yeah,
it still resonates. The war, the Gulf War, the tornado at the Gulf War, the ramifications still resonate 30 years on. And that was quite tough to do those interviews, actually.
Yeah, you'd have to be delicate, wouldn't you? You can't just storm in. So, yeah.
No, I mean, you'd have to. And the other thing is they're trusting you with their story, and it's emotional, and it's raw, and they're trusting you not to, I don't know, sensationalize it, to over-egg the pudding, just to tell it as it was for them. Mm-hmm. And, to, touching word, the people who have read it, who appear in the book, who either lost loved ones or their loved ones were missing in action or they were part of the tornado force, I've had some really good messages to say. It's really fantastic, which is really gratifying, but it's fantastic not because I'm a brilliant writer, it's fantastic because the stories are so good. But most importantly, a couple of people saying, John, I didn't know, I was there, I'm in the book, I'm one of the main people that runs through, but I didn't know what everybody else was doing.
Yeah.
So other people on my squadron, other people on the other, I didn't know. And especially for a couple of the wives and a couple of the kids have said, do you know what? It's really captured what it was like for us. And that's really important to me. Yeah.
Absolutely. So where did this idea stem from, John? Did you always have it in the back of your mind, or was it a recent idea?
No, I did not have it in the back of my mind at all. So, I did the book about the Spitfire.
Yeah,
which told the story of the Spitfire. All my stories are the stories of the aircraft, but through the eyes of the people who were there. So if you want a book on the Spitfire's nuts and bolts and different marks, go to Amazon. And there's just Google Spitfire book, and I think 3,000 come up or something like that. So I'm not telling the story of the aircraft and its nuts and bolts. I'm telling the story of the aircraft through the eyes of the people who were involved with it. So I did Spitfire, then Lancaster, and my publisher said, John, these 2 books have both been bestsellers. We now want you to do something else. And a lot of people said, loads of people were saying, right, you've got to do Hurricane. You've got to do Mosquito. And I've explained it a million times, especially on Twitter. When are you doing Mosquito? I cannot do those books because the veterans on there, for Spitfire and Lancaster, I interviewed 40 or 50 World War II veterans to get the stories. Mm-hmm. The veterans are not there from the Hurricane or the Mosquito. I can't do another World War II book because the veterans are not there in any numbers and they can't remember their stories in the detail that I need to be able to write the type of book that I write.
Absolutely.
I could write a book on the Hurricane, but that's not the book I write. No. I write a book about the people. Mm-hmm. And so it was, I write about this at the beginning of the book. It's 5 years ago. we were having the Gulf War prisoner of war reunion. We have one every year where the half dozen surviving prisoners of war and the special forces guys get together. We have one quiet beer. And then we have 10 really, really loud beers. It was the 25th anniversary 5 years ago, and we had a big dinner in the RAF club where we invited all of our friends. So there's about 110 people in the RAF club for dinner. We had the RAF band there. Sir John Major came as our guest of honour. The Defence Secretary came. And Sir John was talking about, it was really moving. He talked about his sense of responsibility of sending people to war. He said, because he'd been out to Dhahran where the tornadoes were 3 days before the war, 4 days before the war started. He said, I knew something you didn't at that time. I knew I'd be sending you to war in 4 days. And he said, I looked into your eyes and I saw my 17, 18-year-old son, and many of you were not much older. And he said, he talked about the sense of responsibility, sending people knowing some would die. And he made a point at the dinner of kind of seeking out some of the wives, some of the widows, the loved ones, and talking to them. And that was really moving. And it got me to thinking about the whole thing. And it also, we started to talk about it a bit more, because we'd never really, everybody knew a bit about what everybody else had done. Oh, do you remember when the bomb exploded? Oh, do you remember when but nobody had talked about it in detail. And people started 25 years on talking about it in detail. And I thought, that's a story that, I'm intrinsically involved in that story, but I don't know what the story is. And it hasn't been done before. So that's how the new Tornado book came around.
So, John, you also work with one of my buddies, and he's been on the show a few times, and we've had a few drinks together, Mike Napier. What was his contribution to the book?
Napes was a star because Napes has obviously written a couple of books about the aircraft itself. And what Napes was really kind, he allowed me to kind of use his book as a source. It's lying over there somewhere. So it meant that I didn't then have to go out and get loads and loads and loads of technical detail, because he had done it all in his book, GR1, and then Tornado over the Tigris.
Yeah.
So he has got descriptions of exactly how the TFR worked, exactly what it was like, exactly the kind of the layout of the jet. And Napes allowed me to use those as source material for my book. And of course, some of the people who appeared in Napes' earlier book, people like my flight commander, Gordon Buckley, one of our QFIs, Nick Hurd, some of their little bits of the accounts are in Napes' book. And I then I went back and interviewed some of my old friends at length. So he was really kind in allowing me to use and cite his books as the basis of some of the source material.
And also, along with the great stories, there's some brilliant photography. Where did that come from, John?
All sorts of different people. Ian Black, I think you might. I don't know if you've had Ian. Ian's a former Phantom Lightning, Tornado F3 pilot. I flew with Ian on 11 Squadron. Some of his fantastic photographs in there. I think that's his on the.
It's a brilliant front, the
opening cover. Mark Ranger. So some of his later GR4 taken at Marham are in the book. Simon Whitaker, there's a famous one looking down onto the cockpit of a tornado going through one of the Welsh valleys, and you can see into the cockpit. You can see where the pilot and the nav's hands are. You can see, and it's a beautiful picture. So also, and some of them are just mates. So I said to everybody involved in the book, send me some of your Gulf War pics. And there were some astonishing ones.
There's some stunners in there.
Some that I couldn't use, I have to tell you. A lot of them. And it's really interesting. So at Bahrain, we were living in a hotel, in the Sheraton Hotel. And it was a really relaxed atmosphere. Not the best atmosphere to go to war in retrospect. And so lots of the photographs were people by the swimming pool, having a beer, having a club sandwich, going out to a restaurant. Tabuk was austere. They were living in wood brick shacks on base, rarely going out. And all of their pictures of them all sitting around in shorts, sitting around a bit clumps of cactus and sand. The Dhahran guys had slightly different accommodation, different. And there's different pictures and a different sense from each base. It was really interesting to pick up from very, very different ways of working.
Yeah, and it certainly brings the book to life, that's for sure. But do you think this book is accessible for non-aviation enthusiasts?
Yeah, it is. And all of my books are, which is why some of the aviation enthusiasts criticize my books. If you look on, the Spitfire and Lancaster are the classic example. It's got, I don't know, on Amazon, I think it's got 1,000 or 1,200 5-star reviews, but there's probably 3 or 4 1-star reviews that say this is very good. This isn't a book about the Spitfire or the Lancaster. He doesn't talk enough about the different marks or the different engines or the different propellers. And that's fine. It's an opinion. It's not a problem. But that's not what I'm writing about. I'm not writing for somebody who wants to know about the nuts and the bolts and the rivets. I'm writing for somebody who wants to know the story of the aircraft. And so the story of the aircraft is there, and it's entirely accessible. Yes, there's some technical detail, but I write it in a way that one of my first editors said, when you write, John, what I want you to do is I want you to think of my mum reading the book. Right. And I've always kept that 30 years on. I still keep that, whether I'm doing something on TV, a presentation when I'm speaking to a big group of people. Mm-hmm. Will your mum understand what I'm saying? Which is why I don't use technical terms. I don't continually refer to the mark something, because my mum wouldn't understand it. Your mum wouldn't understand it. And so yes, the non-aviation enthusiast will really enjoy the book because it's a book about people.
Absolutely. And I think, the viewers will pick up on that. But where can we find it online, John?
It's everywhere. I'm pleased to say it's currently sitting at number 2 in the Sunday Times bestseller list, which I'm proud to reveal today. It's on Amazon. It's online. You can get signed copies online from Waterstones. I would, if you're interested in a copy, do think about shopping local. Do pop down to your local independent bookshop. They're a huge supporter of us authors, and they don't get enough love. Yes, you might get it an extra quid cheaper online, but if you go to your local bookshop, you'll get a personal service. And I'm a great believer in trying to shop local if you can.
Absolutely.
As long as you shop and buy the book.
Brilliant advice. So while we wrap up, what's next for John Nichol?
Well, as I said, I can't do another World War II book at the moment. People said, do the Harrier. Well, I can't. Roland White's done the Harrier really brilliantly in his latest Harrier book. Do the Vulcan. Can't do the Vulcan. The one really crucial mission in the Vulcan that has been done again really well by Roland. Yeah. Buccaneer, Jaguar. Great aircraft, but not the depth of combat sorties that sustain the type of book that I write. Mm-hmm. So I'm in a bit of a pickle. But I've embarked on a new project. Still involves aircraft, but it's a bit different. And I can't tell you because this one's not, I've done, for the last few years, I've done a book a year, but I'm taking 2 years to do this one. So it won't be out for 2 years, but if you're still doing Aircrew interview, I'll come back on and tell you the stories of the next one are utterly astonishing.
I'll look forward to that, John. But where can we find you online? Do you have Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, anything like that?
I use Twitter, at John Nichol RAF. My website's www.johnnichol.com. I'm not a massive social media person, but I do use Twitter a lot. So a lot of people react with me on Twitter about the book and everything else. So you'll find me there.
Brilliant. Well, John, thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
It's been fantastic. Really enjoyed it, Mike. Thanks very much.
Cheers.